It is Wednesday, the 4th of August 2021, and I read yesterday the first bit of chapter 14 of the book Life in the World Unseen by Anthony Borgia. And I read initially the first part of this book, little red book, was entitled Beyond This Life, which had 10 chapters, which gives us quite a lot of information. And then the second part is The World Unseen, and I am now at the last chapter, entitled The Highest Realm, and I read 15 or so minutes yesterday, and then I stopped because I was busy, and I'm finishing it now. And this is the account of Monsignor Robert Hugh Benson, who passed over in 1914 and was really adamant in bringing information from the afterlife to this realm, into this 3D earth plane. And he used Anthony Borgia for his medium. So I am reading now. I think I might repeat this particular chapter because I'm not exactly sure where I stopped. He's met the Egyptian and he has met Chaldean, who is from the highest realm, and they are asking the priest and his friend Edwin and their friend Ruth in the spirit world to come along with him, to attempt to define the immense magnitude of his powers in the spirit world would be essay the impossible. Even were it possible, understanding would fail. Such powers have no counterpart, no comparison even with any administrative powers upon the earth plane. Earthly minds can only conjure up those individuals who ruled the kingdoms upon earth, who held sway over vast territories it may be, but who did so through fear alone, and where all who lived under him lived as serfs and slaves. No earthly king throughout the whole narrative of the history of the earth world ever presided over a state so vast as that presided over by this illustrious personage of whom I'm speaking. And his kingdom is ruled by the great universal law of true affection. Fear could not exist in the minutest, tiniest fraction, because there's not and cannot be the slightest cause for it, nor will there ever be. He is the great living visible link between the Father, the Creator of the universe, and his children. But notwithstanding the supreme elevation of his spiritual position, he descends from his celestial home to visit us here in these realms, as I have tried to describe to you on a former occasion. And it is permissible for others of incomparably lesser degree to visit him in his home. There's nothing unsubstantial, vague, or unreal about this regal being. We have beheld him on those great festival days that we have in the spirit world. He's not some spiritual experience, some grand upliftment of the soul produced within us by some invisible means from some invisible source. He is a real, living person, as firm as reality as we are ourselves, and we are more real than you are upon the earth plane, though you are not conscious of it yet. I'm putting it to you in this most blunt way so that there will be no misunderstanding of what I'm attempting to recount. There are mistaken notions that the beings of the highest realms are so ethereal as to be practically invisible except to others of their kind, and that they are utterly and completely unapproachable, that no mortal or lesser degree could possibly view them and survive. It is commonly held that these beings are so immeasurably higher than the rest of us that it will be countless eons of time before we shall ever be permitted to cast our eyes upon them, even from a remote distance. That is sheer nonsense. Many a soul in these realms has been spoken to by one of these great beings, and he has been totally unaware of the fact. We are all of us have certain powers which are magnified as we pass from sphere to sphere in the progressive steps of our spiritual development. And one of the principles of these powers is that of matching ourselves, of adjusting ourselves to our surroundings. There's nothing magical about this. It is a highly technical, far more so than most of us of the scientific mysteries of the earth world would believe. In the spirit world we call it an equalizing of our personal vibration rate, but I'm afraid you're now none the wiser, and it is not within my province to attempt to explain it. The Egyptians supplied me with these few details, and I have supplemented them from my own knowledge, which is very small indeed. In the meantime I have digressed a little. By now we were close to Edwin's house, and we were rapidly passing from our own realm into a more rarefied atmosphere. In a short while it would have caused us some discomfort to proceed further. We instinctively halted in our walk, and we felt that the crucial moment of our journey had come. It was of course exactly as the Chaldean had said. We have nothing whatever to fear, and the procedure was perfectly normal and unsensational. First of all, he came behind us and allowed his hands to rest upon our head for a brief moment. This, he told us, was to give us extra power to move through space. We felt a tingling sensation immediately beneath his hands that was most pleasant and exhilarating, and we felt as though we were becoming lighter, although one could scarcely have thought that would be possible. We could also feel a gentle heat running through the system. This was merely the effect of the power and was nothing in itself. The Chaldean placed Ruth between Edwin and me, and then he stood just behind her himself. He placed his left hand upon Edwin's shoulder and his right hand upon mine, and as he was wearing a mantle, which we say was richly embroidered, it formed a perfect cloak about the three of us. It must not be assumed that a dignified silence had fallen or had been imposed upon us during these preliminaries. On the contrary, the Chaldean and the Egyptian, in fact, all the five of us, were chatting away merrily, the former contributing by far the largest share to our jocundity. This was no dreary pilgrimage on which we were embarking. Far from it. It is true that we were about to be taken into realms far, far removed from our own normal habitation, but that was no reason for a heavy solemnity, nor for the assumption of an intense gravity which we did not feel. The Chaldean had done his utmost to dispel any such emotions upon our part. The visit, he said, in fact, was to be a glorious, happy one. Let us have smiling faces then, and lightness of heart. Mournfulness has no place in the high realms any more than it has in our own sphere. We shall be expected, he said, to present smiling, happy faces that are true reflection of our feelings within. But it would be impossible not to be cheerful when in the presence of the Chaldean and his companion. And I am sure we did credit to them both for all their assiduity on our behalf, for I think we did most surely present to others the very embodiment of spiritual gaiety. The Chaldean told us by placing his hands upon our head that it would also have the effect, in addition to giving us power to travel, of adjusting our vision to the extra intensity of light that we should encounter in the high realms. Without such counterbalancing, we should find ourselves in very considerable distress. In his adjustment, our sight was not dimmed from within, but a kind of film was superimposed without, just in the same way as upon earth you wear protective glass to shield the eyes from the light and the heat of the sun. We did not actually wear any such apparatus, of course. The Chaldean merely applied his own powers of thought. What he did precisely I cannot say, but the process, whatever it was, he had applied many times before, and it was needless to say fully effective. The Egyptian next took our hands within his, and we perceived a fresh accession of power flowing into us. The Chaldean asked us to make ourselves completely passive, and to remember we were upon a journey for our enjoyment and not a test of our spiritual endurance. And now, my friends, said he, our arrival is awaited, so let us be off. We immediately felt ourselves to be floating, but this sensation ceased abruptly after what seemed but a second of time, and thereafter we had no sense of movement whatsoever. A light flashed before our eyes. It was extremely bright, but it was by no means startling. It vanished as quickly as it came, and coincidental with its disappearance. I could feel the solid ground under my feet, and then the first vision of the high realms opened before our eyes. We were in a dominion of unparalleled beauty. There is no imagination upon the earth plane that can visualize such inexpressible beauty. and I can only give you some meagre details of what we saw in the limited terms of the earth plane. We were standing within the realm of a king. That was evident to us at once. We stood upon an elevation some height above the city. Our good friends had expressly taken us to this particular location to present us with this superb view. It would not be possible, they said, to spend more than a limited period here, and so it was the wish of the Chaldean's master that we should see as much as possible within that period. Stretching before us was the wide stream of a river, looking calm, peaceful, and overwhelmingly lovely, as the heavenly sun touched every tiny wave with the mirrored tints and tones. I'm just going to close this window. I hate it because then I forget my space. Tints and colours. Myriad tints and tones. Occupying a central position in the view and upon the right bank of the river was a spacious terrace built to the water edge. It seemed to be composed of the most delicate alabaster. A broad flight of steps led up to the most magnificent building that the mind could ever contemplate. It was several stories high, each of them being arranged in a series of orders, so that each occupied a gradually diminishing area until the topmost was reached. Its exterior appearance was, if anything, almost plain and unadorned, and it was obvious why this should be so. The whole edifice was exclusively composed of sapphire, diamond and topaz, or at least their celestial equivalent. These three precious stones constituted the crystalline embodiment of the three colours blue, white and gold, and they corresponded with the colours which we had seen before in the robe of our celestial visitor, as we had seen them in the temple, and which he carried in such immense degree. The blue, white and gold of the jewelled palace, touched by the pure rays of the great central sun, were intensified and magnified 1,000-fold, and flashed forth in every direction their beams of the purest light. Indeed, the whole edifice presented to our bewildered gaze one vast volume of sparkling irradiation. We had once thought of earthly topaz and sapphire and diamonds, and we pondered how small stones of purity were only tiny objects that could be held between the forefinger and thumb, and here was an immense glittering mansion entirely built of these precious stones, and of such stones that the incarnate have never beheld, nor are they ever likely to behold while they are incarnate. Our first question concerned the reason of significance of the special fabric of the building that was before us. There was no special significance in the actual materials of which the place was constructed, so the Chaldean informed us. The precious stones were proper to the realm which we were now visiting. In our own realm the buildings are opaque, albeit they have a certain translucence of surface, but they are ponderous and heavy by comparison with the upper realms. We had journeyed through many other spheres to reach this present one, but had we paused to observe the lands through which we had passed, we should have seen a gradual transformation taking place until the relatively heavy-looking materials of our own realm became transmuted into the crystalline substance upon which our gaze was now fastened. But the colours most certainly had a special significance, to which I have already alluded. We could see surrounding the palace many acres of the most enchanting gardens, laid out in such fashion that, from the distant and elevated viewpoint which we occupied, they presented a huge and intricate pattern, as in some superbly wrought eastern carpet. We were told that upon close view, or in walking through the gardens, the pattern would be lost, but that we should find ourselves in the midst of delicately arranged flower beds and soft velvety lawns. Though we could scarcely remove our eyes from the superlative glory of the palace and its ground, yet the Chaldean gently drew our attention to the remainder of the prospect. It extended for miles upon countless miles, or so it seemed to us. The range of our vision was increased in this rarefied region beyond all human conception, and so it seemed that literally an unending vista spread before us of more earthly miles than it would be possible to contemplate. And all through this wide expanse we could see other magnificent buildings, built of still more precious stones, of emerald and amethyst, to name but two, and far away what looked like pearl. Each of the different buildings was set amidst the most entrancing gardens, where trees were growing of unimaginable richness of colour and grandeur of form. Wherever we cast our eyes, we could see the flashing of jewelled buildings, reflecting back the rays of the central sun, the myriad colours from the flowers, and the scintillations from the waters of the river that flowed before us far away into the distance. And we were gazing spellbound upon the scene. A sudden flash of light seemed to come from the palace directly to the Chaldean, and it was acknowledged by an answering flash which he sent back to the palace. Our presence in the realm was known, and as soon as we had feasted our eyes upon the view, we were asked to walk within the palace, where our host would be waiting to receive us. Such was the message contained in the flash of light as interpreted by the Chaldean. We therefore proceeded at once towards the palace. By the same means of locomotion that had brought us into the sphere, we found ourselves walking upon the terrace beside the river and up a broad flight of steps that led to the main entrance of the palace. The stonework of the terrace and the steps were pure white, but we were much surprised by its apparent softness underfoot, for it was like walking upon the velvet softness of a well-tended lawn. Our footsteps made no sound, but our garments rustled as we walked along. Otherwise, our progress would have been a silent one except for our conversation. There were, of course, many other sounds to be heard. We had not stepped into a realm of silence. The whole air was filled with harmony sent forth from the volumes of colour that abounded upon every hand. The temperature seemed to us much higher than that of our own realm. The Chaldean told us that it was really much higher than we could feel, but our minds had been attuned to the difference of temperature, just as they had been attuned to the intensity of light. A gentle breeze was pleasantly perceptible as it touched our faces with his heavenly scented breath. As we proceeded through the palace entrance, I should clearly have loved to have lingered to examine more closely the remarkable material of which the building was composed, but time pressed. Our stay could not be prolonged beyond our capacity to resist the rarity of the atmosphere and the intensity of light, notwithstanding the charge of spiritual force that the Chaldean and the Egyptian had given us. As we passed through, therefore, we had but a fleeting glimpse of the grandeur that encompassed us. So beautifully proportioned were the various apartments and galleries that there was no overbearing loftiness to any of them, such as one might have expected in an edifice of such dimensions. Everywhere that we cast our eyes, we could see jewelled walls and jewelled floors. Upon the walls were pictures of pastoral scenes where the artist had utilized every gem known to mortal man, and many others unknown to him, as the medium for his work. These pictures were in the execution of a mosaic order, but the effect produced upon the beholder was of liquid light, if I may use the term. The constituents of the pictures sent forth their rays of light in all the colours that the subject demanded, and the effect upon the eye was one of pure life. The colours themselves were exquisite, and contained many more tones and shades of tones than earthly pigments could provide. It seemed inconceivable that precious stones could exist that had such a wide variety of colours. But then we are in the spirit world, and in a high realm of the spirit world too. As we walked down the corridors, we met and were greeted by the most friendly and gracious beings, who thus added to our welcome. Welcome indeed was the overmastering feeling that enveloped us as we first put foot within the palace. There was no coldness, but everywhere the warmth of friendliness and affection. At last we paused before a small chamber, and the Chaldean told us that we had reached the highest point of our journey. I did not feel exactly nervous, but I wondered what formalities were to be observed, and as I was totally unaware of what description these might be, as well as we all were, except of course our two ciceroni, I was naturally a little hesitant. The Chaldean, however, immediately assured us that by telling us to follow him and merely to observe those rules dictated by good taste. We entered. Our host was seated by a window. As soon as he saw us, he rose and came forward to greet us. First he thanked the Chaldean and the Egyptian for bringing us to him. Then he took us each by the hand and bade us be welcome to his home. There were several vacant chairs close to that in which he had been seated, and he suggested that we might like to sit with him there and enjoy the view. It was, he explained, his favourite view. We drew close to the window, and we could see beneath us a bed of the most magnificent white roses, as pure white as a field of snow, and which exhaled an aroma as exalting as the blooms from which it came. White roses, our host told us, were flowers he preferred above all others. We seated ourselves, and I had an opportunity, as our host spoke to us, of observing him at close quarters, where before I had but seen him from a distance. Seeing him thus in his own home and surroundings, his facial appearance was in general similar to that of which he had presented when he visited us in the temple in our own realms. There were differences, however, as we saw him here, differences that were largely a matter of light intensity. His hair, for example, seemed to be golden. When he came to us here, it seemed to be as of bright golden light rather than of colour and gold. He looked to be young, to be of eternal youthfulness, but we could feel the countless aeons of time as it is known on earth that lay behind him. When he spoke, his voice was sheer music, his laugh as a rippling of the water, but never did I think it possible for one individual to breathe forth such affection, such kindliness, such thoughtfulness and consideration. And never did I think it possible for one individual to possess such an immensity of knowledge as it was possessed by this celestial king. One felt that under the Father of Heaven he held the key to all knowledge and wisdom. But strange as it may sound, though we had been transported unfathomably distances to the presence of this transcendingly wonderful being, yet here, in his very presence, we felt perfectly at home, perfectly at ease with him. He laughed with us, he joked with us, he asked us what we thought of the roses, and had the Chaldean managed to keep us merry upon our way hither. He spoke to each of us individually, displaying an exact acquaintance with all our concerns collectively and personally. Then finally he came to the reason for his invitation to us to visit him. In company with my friends, he said, I had visited the dark realms, and I had encountered what I had seen there. He thought that it would be in the nature of a pleasant contrast if we were to visit the highest realm and see for ourselves some of its beauties, to show that the inhabitants of such high realm are not shadowy, unreal people, but on the contrary they are like ourselves, capable of feeling and exhibiting the emotions of their fine natures, capable of human understanding, of human thought, and as easily susceptible to laughter and free-hearted merriment as we were ourselves. And he had asked us to visit him in order to tell us himself that these realms wherein we were now visiting were within the reach of every soul that is born upon the earth plane, that no one can deprive us of that right, and that although it may take countless years of time to reach those realms, yet there is all eternity in which to achieve that end, and that there are unlimited means to help us on our way. That, he said, is the simple great fact of spirit life. There are no mysteries attached to it. All is perfectly straightforward, plain, and unrestricted by complicated beliefs, religions, or otherwise. It requires no adherence to any particular form of orthodox religion, which of itself has no authority to assure any single soul of its powers to secure the soul's salvation. No religious body that ever existed can do that. Let me read this again. It requires no adherence to any particular form of orthodox religion, which of itself has no authority to assure any single soul of its powers to secure the soul's salvation. No religious body that ever existed can do that. And so this realm is incomparably beautiful. And so this realm of incomparable beauty was free and open to all to work their way thither from their very lowest and foulest realm. It may take eons of time to accomplish, but that is the great and superb finale of the lives of the earth's world's millions of souls. Our good friend the Chaldean then mentioned to his master that our stay had almost reached its limit. The latter said he was sorry to observe that it was so, but that such powers as had been invoked for us had their limitation, and so for our comfort we must work within them. However, he added, there are other occasions, and thus he extended further invitations to us. We now rose, and I could not resist the lure of the view of the roses from the window. I gazed out once more. Then we made our way ready to depart. Our gracious host said he would accompany us to the hill from which he had had our first glimpse of his kingdom, from which we had had our first glimpse of his kingdom. We followed a different route from that by which we had reached the palace, and what was our delight when it led us directly to the rose bed. Stooping, our host culled 3 of the most choice blooms that mortal eyes ever beheld, and presented one to each of us. Our joy was still further heightened by the knowledge that, with the affection that we should shower upon them, the blooms would never fade or die. My one anxiety was that in taking them to our own realm we should see them crushed, perhaps, by the unaccustomed density of our heavier atmosphere. But our host assured us that they would not, for they would be borne up by our thoughts of them and of the giver, and between the one and the other they would be amply supported and would so remain. At length we reached our point of departure. Words would not express our feelings, but our thoughts passed unfailingly to him who had brought us this supreme happiness, this foretaste of our destiny, and of the destiny of the whole earth world and the whole spirit world. And with a blessing upon us all, and with a smile of such affection, of such ineffable benignity, he bade us Godspeed, and we found ourselves once more in our own realm. I have tried to tell you something of what we saw, but words cannot be found to describe it, because I cannot translate the purely spiritual into earthly terms. My account must therefore fall far, far short. And so, also in those other matters of which I have treated, to give you a comprehensive account of all that we have seen in the world of spirit would fill many volumes, and therefore I have chosen what I felt would be of most interest and benefit for the earth people. My earnest wish is that I have captured your interest, taken you away for a moment from the pressing affairs of earthly life, and given you a glimpse of the world beyond the world in which you are now living. If I have brought a measure of comfort or of good hope, then great is my reward, and I would say to you, benedicat te omnipotens Deus. Beneficial is the omnipresent God, I think, but I don't speak Latin. Benedicat de te omnipotens Deus. I think that means benefits to the omnipotent God. So this was printed in Great Britain by Odhams, and it must be, at least 40 years old, if not older. Monsignor Hugh Benson died in 1914, so he describes his passing into the spirit world, channeled by Victor Borgia. I loved it.